Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Ray, a question on the cybersecurity topic, if I could, and as it relates to China in particular. Are you concerned about the growing practice of American technology companies, or any American companies for that matter, storing large amounts of data, consumer data, business data, in China, and sometimes storing the encryption keys to that data in China? I mean, what sort of a cybersecurity risk does this pose? Is this something you're tracking that you're concerned about?
It is something that we're concerned about, in part because Chinese laws require a level of access that is unparalleled, certainly in this country, in terms of law enforcement and security services. Chinese law essentially compels Chinese companies, and typically compels U.S. companies that are operating in China, to have relationships with different kinds of Chinese companies, to provide whatever information the government wants, whenever it wants, essentially just for asking. And so that creates all kinds of risks, across the various threats that we have to contend with.
And that your point there about the Chinese laws and the access to data that Beijing requires sort of works in two ways, doesn't it? I mean, it is a problem for American companies who choose to store large amounts of data in China, because to do so they have to partner under Chinese laws with some sort of Chinese counterpart that often has ties to the government, right? That's number one. But number two, it's also a security risk from the point of view of Chinese-based companies who have access to our market, who do business here, gather large amounts of information on American consumers, like TikTok, for instance, but actually are owned or based in China, and therefore are subject to those same Chinese laws on data and data sharing. Is that fair to say?
That's absolutely something that we're concerned about. Even you start with the proposition that a astonishing percentage of Chinese companies are in fact state-owned enterprises, but even the ones that are not technically state-owned enterprises, the ones that are ostensibly private, are subject both to the Chinese laws that I referred to a minute ago, as well as, and I think a lot of people just kind of gloss right over this, any Chinese company of any appreciable size has, by Chinese law, embedded in them Chinese Communist Party cells, or committees as they're called, whose sole function is to ensure that that company stays in lockstep with the Chinese Communist Party's policies. Can you imagine something like that happening with American companies and American policy? I mean, it's something that people need to take very seriously.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you for your work on this. I think, as you point out, I think American consumers don't realize the threat to their own data security and privacy when American companies choose to store that data in China and thereby open up potentially that data to use by the Chinese government, or they don't realize that Chinese-based companies who are doing business in this country are subject to those same laws, and so it works both ways. Switching gears, Secretary Gloway, let me ask you about the border. Senator Portman was talking about the influx of meth and the serious effects it has in Ohio. I can tell you, in the state of Missouri, we are absolutely overwhelmed with meth coming across from the border. I mean, there is not a community in my state, urban, rural, north, south, east, west, that is not just awash in meth. You pointed out that between, I think it was 2017 and 2019, that the southern border apprehensions up over 200% for meth. I just wanted to drill down on a few additional details here and to get your input. Did I hear you to say to Senator Portman that the meth apprehensions, other drug apprehensions, have continued to increase even as border apprehensions of illegal individuals has decreased? Is that right?
That is correct. And again, this is a 2-year snapshot. So it was cocaine 40%, fentanyl 20%, heroin 30%, and methamphetamine 200%. And that's at the border. That's at the border is where we're seizing that. That's in addition to the migration challenges we've had, but just by officers taken offline with the detention processing, we're still seeing the numbers up. And
do you have any sense in the last few months? I know that we've seen a decline in the last few months of border apprehensions of individuals, but do you have a sense, or do you know what the numbers for contraband look like?
Senator, we could get back as a QFR on that, but what I would say, and I said this earlier, is the business model for the cartels is to move illicit goods and people across the border to get them there and to move them. And that grows through a very sophisticated network inside the country of Mexico and south of Mexico, as well as a management structure called plaza bosses that occupy the entire southwest border. They control what goes across and what does not go across, and it's all based on money of moving people and goods.
Let me ask you this. You talked about fentanyl production moving, at least to some degree, to Mexico, so from China to Mexico, although it sounds like maybe in partnership with Chinese outlets. Can you say something more about that?
What I would say is that we may want to take this in a classified setting, but we have seen that the fentanyl production and trafficking, as we would anticipate, the cartels own the supply chain in the United States and the trafficking routes getting in here, that fentanyl production and trafficking would begin to move into Mexico, and we are seeing that.
Finally, let me ask you this. You said that in order to address this crisis, the drug crisis and the flow of drugs over the border, it would require a change in our whole strategic approach. Can you say more about what you have in mind and what you think needs to change, maybe what this committee and this body would do to give you the tools that you need?
Well, I would say I'd welcome a conversation that would probably expand upon my partners here at this table. But in my prior capacity as a unique witness, I was the Deputy National Intelligence Manager for transnational organized crime when I was at the ODNI. And when I say that as a strategic approach, what I mean is bringing law enforcement, U.S. intelligence community, Mexican intelligence community, and military assets to bear in Mexico in some of these lawless areas where the cartels are essentially running the area. But that also has to be hand in glove with our demand. The U.S. has a high demand for narcotics, so it's a joint process, and it's in that realm of having that partnership with our Mexican counterparts in that space to identify the bad and fill it with the good.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.